Following on from his quick submission victory over Cyril Gane, the hype on Jon Jones as the greatest MMA fighter of all time is back at an all-time high. Therefore, his fight against an aging Stipe Miocic is already a foregone conclusion in the eyes of some fans. However, for those wanting a reminder of Jon Jones' mortality, I would look to his fight against Dom Reyes. From all accounts of the fight stats, Jones was outstruck in the first 3 rounds. Reyes' strikes weren't just significant in the technical sense of not being a jab, but in many cases solid shots, with Jones not landing much in return. Considering how the last 2 rounds were still quite competitive, and definitely not 10-8 rounds, it's hard to see how that fight shouldn't have been scored 48-47 for Reyes. For another example of Jones' mortality, you can look to his fight against Thiago Santos. In the first round, Santos landed some hard leg kicks, with Jones not looking close to landing a counterpunch or checking most of the kicks. In the second round, Santos' knee would blow out. Santos' knee would spasm throughout the rest of the fight, and his mobility would be heavily compromised. Despite fighting a severely compromised fighter, Jones was only able to prevail with a narrow decision victory. As I said before though, the win over Gane seems to have erased the memory of some of Jones' lackluster performances towards the end of his light heavyweight title run, and is apparently something he pulled off whilst having an injury for most of his training camp. Ahead of the matchup with Stipe Miocic, the main questions around Jon Jones are what weight will he come into the fight at, and with what body composition. With Stipe Miocic, the question is also what weight will he come into the fight at. In the past, Miocic has weighed in the mid-240 range for his UFC fights, though he lost weight during the pandemic. There are rumours Miocic has now bulked back up.
As I'm getting a text message from Stipe Miocic right now, he said, I'm at the eye doctor doing his exam. He's 245.
The other factors are ring rust and who will be more technically sharp, which partly ties in with the issue of weight. From their social media posts, you get the impression that Jon Jones has spent the last several years focused on bodybuilding and weight training. Whilst the core of his style and favourite moves are unlikely to have changed much in that time, he could have lost a significant amount of technical sharpness that is not necessarily contradicted by the 2-minute Cyril Gane fight. Stipe seems to be more focused on skill training, with him mostly posting boxing clips. Whether or not these posts are an insight into each guy's mind is debatable. It's very possible the day-to-day contrasts hugely with what you see them posting. To look at this fight tactically and stylistically, I think there is a question of whether or not Jones' historically solid chin can take the power of Stipe Miocic. I think there is also a question of what happens if Jones gets on top. Jones has made short work of guys on the ground in recent fights. In the second Alexander Gustafsson fight, Jones scored a TKO soon after the first takedown. Cyril Gane was also obviously submitted pretty quickly. Jones has also put on solid performances in submission grappling matches. Stipe Miocic, in contrast, surprisingly doesn't have one win by submission in his whole MMA career. Despite this factoid, he has shown a willingness to pursue grappling in the past. He has also shown he can get back up off the bottom if taken down. I think the main tactical consideration is how does Stipe Miocic handle Jon Jones at long range. If you look at some of Jon Jones' best and most surprising performances, they have come against guys who weren't able to compete with him at long range. If you take the fight against Rampage Jackson, before the fight, a lot of people were wondering how Jones would deal with Jackson's boxing and punching power. As it turned out, Jones was mostly able to win the striking at long range with his straight kicks. I think it's fair to say that whilst Jackson had seen shin kicks before, at that point in his career he had never faced someone who made use of the extra range with straight kicks. If you look at Jones' fight with Vitor Belfort, the same scenario occurred for much of the striking. Belfort had major problems dealing with straight kicks at long range. On paper, the surprising thing is that whilst Jones had a very easy time with the boxing-focused Belfort and Jackson, his two toughest fights came against Reyes and Gustafsson, who, whilst being MMA fighters first and foremost, would probably be considered guys with a modest boxing specialty compared to the average UFC fighter. To be fair, when describing Gustafsson and Reyes as Jones' toughest opponents, I think you have to put an asterisk by the fight against Thiago Santos due to the knee injury. To look at what differs in the styles between Gustafsson and Reyes compared to Jackson and Belfort, I think it's fair to say that Reyes and Gustafsson are both very light on their feet and use movement as their primary method of defense. For Rampage Jackson, training under Juanito Ibarra at the time, who was a shady trainer with a knowledge solely of boxing, he had become very good at fighting in a phone booth, but his feet were virtually stuck in the mud. Vitor Belfort was a bit more mobile, but he would also come under the category of a slugger in my opinion. If you think about a knee stomp as a technique, having good blocks, parries and head movement are all irrelevant techniques. The only way to avoid it is with footwork. To look at Stipe's defensive skills, he has been more inclined to use blocking and head movement to defend strikes than guys like Reyes or Gustafsson. Whilst he doesn't necessarily float like a butterfly, I think it's fair to say heavyweights who use a lot of movement, such as Muhammad Ali or Alexander Usyk, tend to be freak outliers, usually due to the level of conditioning required to execute this tactic, where Gustafsson and Reyes' proactive movement may have led to them fading against Jones in the later rounds. Stipe has a more economical style for a 245-pound heavyweight. The other factor is if Jones' side kicks and oblique kicks keep Stipe at long range, how much of a threat does Miocic pose there? Stipe does have a win via low kicks early in his career, though he reportedly has short leg reach. Overall, I think Miocic is unlikely to be as lost at long range as some of Jones' other opponents. In terms of the clinch, this will be the second time in Jones' career where he will be physically overmatched, if you go by the training footage and Miocic reportedly weighing in the mid-240 range. Historically, I think Jones has looked the best when he's beating guys at long range and then bypasses boxing range to move into the clinch. Considering that Miocic has the same height and leverage as Jones, as well as looking leaner, I don't expect the clinch to be the sweet spot for Jones that it has in the past. Though I would still make Jones the favourite in the clinch, it wouldn't be surprising if these two cancel each other out there. It's also possible that if either of these two don't like how the striking is going, they may change levels for a leg attack from the clinch, which will likely be a bad idea. One thing Miocic has going for him in this matchup is he has a tendency to attack the legs from behind. It seems a long shot that a scenario presents itself for Miocic to attack Jones' legs from behind, but it may have been a long time since Jones has seen this style of attack if an opportunity does present itself. In terms of groundwork, Jones is the more likely of the two to secure a submission or dominant position. That said, equally Jones isn't completely dominant when it comes to holding people down. Overall, I think the most likely outcome in this fight is that it goes to a decision. I don't think either guy will fancy wrestling the other guy for 25 minutes, so it will most likely play out on the feet. Considering that Jones is younger and has been more recently active, I'd make him the favourite to edge a close decision with his more diverse striking attack. That being said, I'm not certain that Jones' cardio will hold up as a heavyweight. So this has been my opinion. I'd put Jones at about a 55% chance of winning without knowing what's going on behind the scenes. Let me know in the comments how you see this one going.